I believe that's everything from me. So I'm just really pleased now to introduce a beloved Writer Center instructor, longtime instructor, John DeDakis, who is here to moderate this discussion and introduce us to our guest of honor this evening. John, thank you so much.
Thank you, Zach. Judge Russell F. Canan practiced criminal defense and civil litigation in the District of Columbia, Maryland, and throughout the South. In 1983, he helped establish the Southern Center for Human Rights in Atlanta, where he represented prisoners on death row. Judge Canan was appointed to the Superior Court of the District of Columbia in 1993 by President Bill Clinton. Judge Canan is the former presiding judge of the criminal division, and he chaired a committee that studied wrongful death convictions, and they proposed reforms. And he is a co-editor and co-author of the book Tough Cases. Judges tell the stories of some of the hardest decisions that they've ever made. So, Judge Canan, thank you very much for being here and for allowing me to be the interrogator today. So tell us a little bit more about this book, Pursuing the Horizon. Why Pursuing the Horizon, and how did this book come about?
Thanks, John, and deepest thanks to my family and friends and colleagues who supported me through the writing of this book. I hold your efforts very deep here tonight. I also want to give a shout out to the Writers Center. I've taken a number of courses at the Writers Center over the years, and whatever you may be interested in, fiction, nonfiction, poetry, children's books, you name it, they have it, and they're open for business, and it's been a fabulous place for me to go. And if you're ever interested in doing some writing, I highly recommend it. I also want to thank you, John, for hosting here today. Not cross-examining, but hosting, I think, is what you said.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
Depends
on the quality of the answers, I think.
I know I'm violating some of the rules of promoting your own book, but I've taken a couple of courses with John over the years. I'm also a charter member of the John DeDakis fan club. He's a former journalist with CNN, and now the novelist has written 5 books about an investigative journalist named Lard Chatwick. And I read the first 2, just to give him a shout out here. Here's the first one, Fast Track. So I just purchased a 3rd one, so that's on my night table. So I'm going to get to it soon, John.
Thank you.
And then I also want to thank very much all my new friends at 12 Tables Press. I see Steve Eric on here, and 12 Tables have been fantastic, been very supportive. We've had a lot of decisions to make. We've always made them collaboratively, and I'm very appreciative of the support that Steve and others at 12 Tables have given me in doing this book. You asked about the title and how this book came about. The title, Pursuing the Horizon, Stories of Justice. 2 interests really came together. The first, as you mentioned, was the book Tough Cases. About 4.5 years ago, myself and colleagues and friends on the Superior Court, Greg Mize and Fred Weisberg, we were thinking that there might be an interest for the general public to get a behind-the-scenes viewpoint of judging and how judges go about making their toughest decisions for their tough cases. And we were very fortunate to get a publisher pretty quickly, the New Press, which is based in New York. And they asked us to recruit, and I think we were pretty successful, a wide range of judges with diverse backgrounds and diverse cases from Houston, Texas, and Los Angeles, California, Washington State, Minnesota, Michigan, the Little Traverse Bay Band of Ottawa Indians, and the chief judge of that court, Allie Greenleaf Maldonado. We got a judge from the Bronx, my favorite place, as well as Judge Reggie Walton, a federal judge in DC, and 2 judges in Florida with 2 very famous cases, the Terry Schiavo judge, Judge George Greer, and Judge Jennifer Bailey, who was the presiding judge of the Elian Gonzalez case. And Tough Cases came out about 2 years ago, and it was a very rewarding and enriching experience. And to the extent it was successful, I think it helped celebrate the rule of law and the independence of the judiciary, and gave the general reader, the public, a rare lens into the daily life and minds of those who seek to achieve justice and those who must live or sometimes die with the consequences of those decisions. So I was inspired by working on Tough Cases, and I decided to keep it going and wrote 2 more chapters. My story in Tough Cases, which is reprinted in the present book, is called Rough Justice and deals with the age-old problem of, do the ends justify the means if the ends are just? And what does a judge do when strictly following the law may end up in a miscarriage of justice? The 2 new chapters are Right to Live, Right to Die, which was inspired in part by the Terry Schiavo case because it follows in that footsteps in dealing with a termination of life support case when the person in a vegetative state never made known her wishes, and the family was divided as to whether or not she should die with dignity or remain on life support. And the last chapter from this side of the bench is called The Illusion of Delusion, the Murder of Viola Draft, and the Strange Case of General Albrecht Moot, which dealt with a very high-profile case that had many difficult legal and emotional issues on all sides, and which coincidentally was made into a Hollywood movie with Christoph Waltz and Vanessa Redgrave. So there was a great deal of interest.
Who played you? Who played you?
Well, that's a bit of a sore point, because while the movie was being made, people would ask that question. I would always say, I heard that George and Brad were arm wrestling over who would play me in the movie. I haven't seen the movie yet, but I do know a female actress plays the judge in the movie. So George or Brad didn't get that chance. With those chapters in the book and the idea of achieving justice or seeking justice, I wanted to expand the book to some cases dealing with my experience as a criminal defense lawyer doing death penalty cases. So 1 chapter, and there are 2 death penalty cases from both ends of the process. And sadly, the death penalty is very much in the news again, as there seems to be a rush to execute federal prisoners before a new administration comes in. So the first chapter, the 1 chapter called Helter Skelter Son, deals with a case where the state is seeking the death penalty for what they call the worst of the worst, defendant serving time for murder who kills his cellmate. This was in the state of Maryland. And the other case, Burning at the Wire, the execution of John Evans, takes place in Alabama and deals with the botched execution on the electric chair in Alabama. I also wanted to take this opportunity in terms of these themes, and many of the themes that go through the book of redemption and mercy and forgiveness. And with those themes in mind, I've always wanted to, for a very long time, to honor the memory of my older brother, Jeff, who at age 17 volunteered for the Army and was killed a year later on the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Vietnam. And this is the journey of our family to find out exactly what happened, because the information we knew didn't really tell us much, and to connect with his fellow soldiers, and then to actually go to Vietnam and pay homage to him at the site where he was in fact killed. And so I think those issues, those themes hopefully resonate throughout the book, both the legal cases and that situation as well. You asked about the title Pursuing the Horizon, Stories of Justice. My working title was Pursuing Justice. And I actually see my rabbi on the chat here, on the screen here, Rabbi David Schneer, and we were talking about that, and pursuing justice. It comes from Deuteronomy, justice, justice shall you pursue. So that was the working title. And about a month or so before I submitted the full manuscript, I was talking with my sister, and my sister Stacy, and you know how siblings can read each other without really talking very much. And she asked me, well, what's the title for your book again? And I said, Pursuing Justice. And there was this pause. And she said, well, that's good, but it sounds pretty familiar. You did Google it, didn't you? To which I responded, duh, no. And while we were talking on the phone, I quickly Googled it on the computer, and lo and behold, there are many books called Pursuing Justice. And I talked it over with the publisher, Steve Eric, and he said, if that's what you want to call it, that's fine. It's maybe your turn to call it. It's not a copyright infringement as long as you don't call it Pursuing Justice with Harry Potter. Because while it might sell some more books, we would probably get sued. And so I was in my study upstairs, and I was looking at a photograph that I had taken several years ago in Tasmania, Australia.
Do you have a copy of the book there? You can show the cover.
I actually don't have a copy here, but
well, they should go online and look at the book.
Yeah, it's on the Writers Center invite, and it shows a dirt road leading to the horizon with the sun bursting through the clouds. And I thought the horizon was a very apt metaphor for justice, because for true justice, justice for all, because like the horizon, true justice cannot be fully fully attained ever in our lifetime, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try for it. So hopefully this book is the efforts from all, from dedicated judges, criminal defense lawyers, prosecutors, those accused of crime, those are victims of crime, jurors, police, nurses, social workers, mental health experts, and the public at large in seeking to obtain justice. So I looked at the photograph. It was the horizon, Pursuing Horizon. There were no books called Pursuing the Horizon. And while doing that effort, I also saw that there was a Stephen Crane poem called Pursuing the Horizon, which Stephen Crane is one of my favorite authors. So that all seemed to work together.
You and I did an interview for my one-to-one interview program, live stream show. And you, during that interview, told me that you were uncomfortable with the term memoir to describe this book. Why is that?
Well, I don't view it really as a memoir, because we're not going to get so much into my personal life and those kinds of things, although the chapter about my brother clearly does that. But I think it's really everyone's story who's dedicated to justice, and how everyone goes about it from our very different perspectives. So I like to think of it more in those terms. And I just see the book arrived here today. So here is the chapter. Here is
Okay, there's the horizon. Excellent. That must have felt pretty good to hold it in your hand for the first time.
Yeah, it just came in literally. I hadn't seen it. My wife just brought it up, so it's the first time.
Oh my goodness!
In the hardcover of the book.
History has just been made.
Yes.
Let's go back a little bit. Was the law always a calling for you? How did you come across that as your life work?
When I graduated college, I went to work as a health aide for a migrant farm workers organization, and we reported a number, and this is actually the first chapter in the book. It was in Klan country in North Carolina. There literally was a welcome to Smithfield. The Ku Klux Klan helped fight immigration and communism.
Jeez.
And we reported a number of cases of basically 20th century slavery. And by we, really the star of the book in many ways was Sister Joseph Beatrice, who was my boss and who was an intrepid seeker of justice and fought very hard for migrant farm workers' rights. And so I became interested. We called it Department of Justice and reported the case for some lawyers there to investigate our cases. And around the same time, my cousin married a DA in Brooklyn. And he said, if you're interested in thinking about law, follow him around for a day. And I did. And it was in Brooklyn criminal court, Schermerhorn Street. And it was a bit of a wild scene. It was just it was dirty and messy and a lot of people on the edge, defendants, victims, witnesses. But there was something about the milieu of it all and the lawyers trying to do their best. And I think being a trial lawyer got in my bones that day. And that plus my experience in the South were probably the main motivators.
Oh, did it become a surprise that you became a judge? How did that come about?
It did become a surprise in the sense that usually, probably those come from the criminal world, the vast majority of former prosecutors, former defense lawyers, at least back in the Superior Court, there weren't that many. There were, of course, quite a few. And a judge on that court, Judge Robert Schuker, who sadly passed away many years ago, he was a former prosecutor, and I had tried a number of cases with him, and he called me up and said, do you want to have lunch? And I was at lunch with Judge Schuker. That was really unheard of. And at that lunch, he said, I think you'd be a good judge. I think you should apply. And I'm not sure I ever would have applied, but for that lunch with Judge Schuker.
What did he say that he saw in you that he thought would make you a good judge?
Well, he was very complimentary of my trial skills and what he perceived to be fairness, and that I could make the conversion from hopefully a zealot advocate for my clients to a fair and balanced judge. I guess that's what he saw.
And as a criminal defense lawyer, you probably had to defend guilty people you knew were guilty, maybe even murderers. How did you approach that? You must have had some sort of inner conflict with your conscience about that, or did you?
I think criminal defense lawyers really appreciate that in a large way. We're trying to keep the system honest, and it's very rare. I mean, it's a common fallacy that criminal defense lawyers ask their clients, "Did you do it?" That's pretty rare. And if the defendant wants to plead guilty, then you help him go through that process. If he wants to go to trial, you don't question what he did. You assume he's presumed to be innocent, and he remains innocent unless and until the government can prove him guilty. And until then, he's presumed innocent, and that's our job. And it can be a little mind-bending at times, no doubt about it. But I think most criminal defense lawyers really try hard to maintain that as a way to proceed.
You were nominated to the bench by President Clinton, and I think there's a fascinating story that you have in terms of your conflict, or John McCain's conflict with you during your confirmation hearing. What's that story?
Well, this is a fluke of history, really, a complete fluke. DC appoints its judges, and DC is an odd jurisdiction. They have a neutral commission, and they recommend 3 names to the president. And so I was one of 3 that was recommended to the president in the fall of 1992. And when President Clinton won the election, he had 60 days by law to appoint his very first judge. So, as I said, it's just a complete fluke, but I happened to be his first appointee, his first nominee. And because I had done death penalty cases, I got more attention than a nominee wants to get. Usually nominees for any position want to lie low under the radar, no publicity, no nothing. And at my confirmation hearing, Senator McCain started out asking a lot of nasty questions in a bit of a nasty way. But it was really quite a fascinating process, because during the course of the hearing, talking about the death penalty, which was interesting since DC doesn't have a death penalty, it seemed that he really just wanted to learn more about the death penalty from someone maybe he didn't have these kinds of discussions with. And I don't know if this happens much today in confirmation hearings, but literally during the course of the confirmation hearing, you could actually see that he had changed his mind, and instead of attacking me, we were just entering into a discourse. And by the end, he said some very complimentary words to me, and he was actually the first person to call me a judge. And so I had very warm feelings about him in the sense that he seemed open-minded.
And how did his opinion change based on your testimony?
I can only think so, because he came in there, hunting for bear, as they say, and by the end, he supported my nomination. I don't know that that happens these days.
And so do you think that he became an opponent of the death penalty based on your conversation, or?
No, I don't think so. I think he just respected a different viewpoint.
Mhm. Well, that sort of brings up another question in terms of the state of affairs, in terms of public perceptions about the judiciary, not to mention journalism, science, all these other things. Have the last 4 years of the Trump administration made it harder to be a judge based on public perceptions?
So now you want to get me in trouble.
Yeah, let's do that.
Let me just say this. I think that the rule of law and the independence of the judiciary have really been put to the test in extraordinary circumstances. And I don't view myself as naive at all, but I actually think the rule of law and independence of the judiciary really can withstand a lot of attack. And I'm feeling very confident that it will thrive in the future.
Here's a question, and it just came to me now, but and if you can't answer it, I understand. But I know that, as far as I know, the issue of whether a president can pardon himself has not ever been resolved at the Supreme Court. Do you have an opinion on whether that is something that's constitutionally allowed, that a president can pardon himself?
I don't really know the answer. I don't think the Constitution prohibits it. So if I had to give what judges shouldn't do, just give the opinions off the seat of their pants. Since the Constitution doesn't prohibit a judge from doing it, my guess is the president probably could, but I don't really know.
But if what you're talking about, the importance of the rule of law, if a president pardons himself, doesn't that fly in the face of a respect for the rule of law?
Now you're really going to get me in trouble. So I think I'm going to pass
Okay.
on that one. We really try to avoid in public situations commenting on those kinds of questions. So I think I'll pass.
Okay, fair enough. But it was good to see you squirm. So anyway, that's what would you say is the biggest misperception that the general public has about what it's like to be a judge?
I really think that the greatest misconception is that, and I know this is contrary to what a lot the public thinks, at least for the trial judges, I always say the vast majority of trial judges I know as colleagues that I appeared before as a lawyer, and not just in DC, but in many other places, really try hard to follow the rule of law and be honest about it. Now, of course, there are bad examples, awful examples, and they exist and they will always exist. That's why the achievement of justice will never be complete. But it's been my experience, most judges try to get it right, irrespective of politics, irrespective of bias or favor. I mean, we're talking about human beings and all the human endeavors that it's very hard to say that it never comes about. Of course it does, but I think the vast majority of judges really try to get it right, that we all take an oath of office to follow the law. And I think for the most part, most judges try to do just that.
I see in the chat, Mark Posner has just asked a question about he'd be interested in hearing how you would discuss the internal thought processes and struggles that you've had in regard to deciding cases and all of that. I know that there's one the tough, I think rough justice was one of the chapters in your book. There, I mean, it's hard to put your personal opinions aside, just as it is for a journalist. But what's it like to have those internal struggles where you really kind of like to see it go one way, but you really can't in good conscience allow that?
Sorry, my question was really about writing one of the chapters of the book. I was interested in Russ talking about his process as an author, and then what struggles about one of the chapters, maybe, whether he could even tell it the way it deserved to be told, or how to tell it, or whether it deserved to be told, or, all the kinds of things that maybe as you tried to shape, and talking about maybe one particular chapter that you struggled with.
Good. Thanks for clarifying that, Mark.
Well, I have one part I can read from, which is the right to die, right to live, right to die chapter, which deals with the termination of life support, contested situation, which, I was hoping during the course of that case that the issue would just simply go away, and I wouldn't have to make that decision. I guess that's one of the hidden secrets of judges, that when really tough situations come, we hope they go away somehow, the case settles, or somehow there becomes an easier way to deal with it. But that wasn't happening in this case. It was contested. I call her YP, a woman in her late 40s, early 50s, in a persistent vegetative state. And to have this authority and responsibility to make this decision whether or not to grant the request of her daughter, who was the guardian, to terminate. So let me read this part on this from that chapter. I also reflected on the exercise of judicial power and its far-reaching consequences. I've taken a child away from her abusive parents and sentenced a rapist who gratuitously killed his victim to prison for the rest of his natural life. I've also evicted a mother and her children from their home, where the mother's only sin was that she was too poor to pay the rent. In protecting a child and giving her a chance to thrive in another loving family, or protecting the community from reprehensible violence, judicial power can be a righteous force for good. In evicting a poor family from their home, judicial power feels like a reluctant, validating force for legal and economic order. On either end of the scale, the scope of the consequences is profound, and I have a healthy respect for the magnitude of the decision I have to make. The judges I most admire and aspire to emulate not only have the intellect to understand the complexity of the law, but more importantly, have reached a balance in their lives to appreciate the limitations of a person's ability to make life-altering decisions while embracing the responsibility to do so. Call it the getting of wisdom, if you will. To entrust a judge with the power of life or death, whether in sentencing a convicted murderer to lethal injection or in authorizing the withdrawal of life support, is perhaps a power the law should not ever allow to one person. It was helpful to have these basic principles. It was helpful to take these basic principles to heart. So I hope I answered your question, Mark.
There's another question on the chat from Jonathan Davidson. He says, I know you don't do constitutional law, but if any of the cases challenging the election results came before you on the bench, would you think they're quote unquote tough cases? And would you welcome the opportunity to toss them? See, I'm not the only one who can make you squirm here.
Yeah, I can see that. And Jonathan's supposed to be a friend of mine too. Well, we actually do quite a bit of constitutional law in Superior Court. So we do constitutional law all the time. And if you're asking me how I would feel doing an election case that would election that would actually turn the election, it would be a difficult, tough case. I don't think I can say anything more than that. But, you know, trial judges, it's not our job essentially to make the law. There are statutes, there are rules of the court, and there are decisions by the Supreme Court and our highest court of appeals called the District of Columbia Court of Appeals. So they give us a lot of guidance as to how to follow the law. If it was that simple, being a judge wouldn't be that hard, though, because there's just a lot of cases that fall within the gray zone where the law is not clear, like in the right to live, right to die, or in the murder case where there's any number of issues of law that were not clear cut. So that's where judges really get to cut their teeth and earn their salary and trying to make those hard decisions.
Peter Sleven writes, you spoke optimistically about the resilience and independence of the judiciary. What can we expect from the 229 Article 3 judges who were nominated and confirmed during the Trump administration? Are you worried? And explain what Article 3 judges are.
Well, Article 3 judges are federal judges appointed for life and can only be removed by a very cumbersome process called impeachment. And I think in the history, my numbers may be a little wrong, but I think in our history, we've had maybe between 11 and 15 impeachments, and they were almost all, not all, but almost all because of criminal conduct. So it's really very, very hard to remove a federal judge short of criminal conduct or something really off the charts. And so, as I said, I am generally optimistic of the judges appointed in the last 4 years. And to give a perfect example, just a couple of days ago, the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, with a decision, I don't remember his name, written by a judge appointed by the present president and two other Republican judges on this panel, 3 panels, completely denied and with withering comments the claims of widespread fraud. So, you know, going into that decision by that court, some people were probably very nervous and concerned it would be just raw politics ruling, but that was a perfect example of judges abiding by their oath of office.
I've got another question, and again, I'm just following my curiosity, which may be taking you down a road you can't go, and if you can't, that I understand. But a lot of the judges that the Trump administration has been have been tapping have been from the Federalist Society. Is that reputable? Is that how would you define the Federalist Society in terms of their doctrine or in terms of their judicial temperament or whatever?
Well, I can't say anything about temperament. That's always such a personal issue. But, you know, there's quote from the right and the left. There's the Federal Society or the ACLU and the organizations that are perceived to be more liberal. So they have, you know, it's sort of a fundamental view of the Constitution as it should be strictly applied, which is a very short version of what you might think of the Federalist viewpoint. It's a legitimate viewpoint. It's one I don't share, but to strictly interpret the Constitution versus believing that the Constitution is really a living and breathing document that must change with the times, because we're a long way from 1789 and times have changed and viewpoints have changed. And, you know, our Constitution, as great as it is, was really a huge compromise where 3 separate parts of the Constitution recognizes slavery. And so I think it's, you know, we've come a long way, and I don't think we should view it as an originalist doctrine.
And it's almost, if I can make the comparison, and you tell me if I'm on the right track, it's the comparison between, like, say, the Federalist Society and the ACLU would be similar to different religious doctrines. In other words, people can subscribe to a more literal interpretation of Scripture, or something where it's a little more nuanced than that. I guess my question is is there a tendency for a person whose judicial philosophy is either rooted in the ACLU approach or the Federalist Society approach? What happens when that doctrine collides with the actual law? Is it still a matter of interpretation, or is the law pretty much clear as it's written? You can tell I'm not a lawyer.
That's okay. We'll forgive you for that.
Thank you.
You know, the death penalty is a perfect example. In the Constitution, although it doesn't specifically say or sanction the death penalty, it makes it clear that you can't take life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So by the very terms of the Constitution, it says it impliedly accepts the death penalty. On the other hand, interpreting that amendment to the Constitution says we should look at the evolving standards of decency that marks the nature of a maturing society. So where you fall along that line of evolving decency is where you come out, I think. And that's where people come out differently.
And so there's room to bring a person's judicial philosophy, whether it's liberal or conservative. That's valid when it comes to addressing the law and interpreting it, correct?
I agree with that.
Okay. Nora asks the question, is there and I think you may have answered this, is there a person or mentor alive or past that served as your guiding person during your career that you looked up to and thought of when making hard decisions? And how would he or she approach this?
Well, as I mentioned, Judge Schuker, when I was a trial judge, was clearly, it was a lesson I learned well. He would take not only me, but the prosecutor after a trial, and we'd come back in his chambers and he would go over the trial. He would praise what we did well. He would tell us what we did wrong. And so to have that kind of relationship with a judge was very meaningful to me. And that's something, quite frankly, that I've tried to do as well as a judge, bring in the younger lawyers and talk about their cases, because it's fairly rare to have that experience, and it was an experience that I have always had. And on the Superior Court, there are really almost too many. One of the beautiful things about Superior Court, it really is a collegial bunch of people, and everybody wants everyone to succeed. And there are unwritten rules that you always take the call from a fellow judge, no matter what you're doing, even if you're on the bench. And there are any number of judges that really helped me, particularly in my first several years, get through that process, because it is a different process. And I can't name them all. There were so many, but I'm deeply indebted to all of them, because I would be the kind of person who would call them on a bench and I'd say, Judge X, I've got this kind of issue before me. Help. What do I do next?
Well, and that kind of leads to the question that John Sturk has asked. Being a judge is a solitary job. Are there opportunities with whom, are there times when you can discuss a difficult case with someone? Clerks are helpful, but they're young lawyers just starting out. So I think what you're saying is that you found that a lot of the wisdom that you get are from other judges, or what role do clerks play? And, who else are you able to, kind of talk through things with?
I overlooked something, and I wanted to make this right here, because one of my mentors on the court was Judge Leonard Brayman, who died recently at age 92 or 3, and I see his wife on the Zoom here. And he was, as a trial lawyer, he was a formidable judge, a bit scary for a trial lawyer. But when I came on the court, we became fast friends, and the chapter about right to live, right to die, and termination of life support, I walked through every aspect of that case before. And I would talk with Leonard about, this is what happened, this is the new pleadings the parties have filed, this is the new facts that we found out. So he's a mentor I definitely want us to give a great shout out, and glad to see his wife is on the Zoom right here too.
Nice. I've also gotten a question, and it fits right in with where I want to go. It's sort of a two-part question. What criteria did you use in selecting which cases and issues you would choose to address in this book? And I want to use that as an opportunity to, in a sense, pivot to talk more about the writing process, because I would imagine that some of the people who are with us tonight are interested in writing. They may not be lawyers or judges or even going in that direction, but talk about the process, the creative process, if you will, of choosing, what you would write about, and just the process itself.
I really wanted to take on the harder cases, the toughest cases. So the right to live, the termination of life support was obvious to me. I struggled a lot with that case. The title of the case, Rough Justice, and having to deal with perhaps that problem of strictly following the law ending up in a miscarriage of justice. And the murder case was fascinating in so many ways, and it's a little too long to go into it right now, but we ended up having a murder case where the defendant was starving himself to such a point where we couldn't bring him to court. He was, in my view, trying to avoid going to trial, and so ended up having the trial this is before Zoom was so popular, but he was literally given many opportunities to eat and get well and come back to court, and he refused to do it. And after advising and warning him several times of this, we ended up trying him by Zoom from his hospital bed. So these were very difficult decisions to make. It had never been done in the Superior Court beforehand. I thought I was right under the law, but until the Court of Appeal says you're right, you never really know. And so I picked very difficult cases that really went to the essence, I thought, of the judging decisions to judging.
What is I was just going to ask, how does the reality of being a writer differ from the expectation? You must have had an expectation of what it was going to be like, to write a book. How did reality differ from the expectation?
For one, it was a lot of fun, for one thing. I mean, it was
really, you didn't expect that it would be fun?
No, legal writing is at times, I wouldn't call it, I see a number of my colleagues on the call here, I'm not saying legal writing would be fun. It's challenging. There's a certain format that you use. It was, in a way, liberating to be able to write what I wanted to write. And especially the court cases, I had to get accurate. And I went to a great deal of depth for the Helter Skelter case, the death penalty trial. I went out to Cumberland, Maryland, where the trial took place. I had lunch with the prosecutors. We tried the case 30 years ago. I dug deep into the historical records. So I tried to be almost like a historian, but I enjoyed that. That was, to me, that was a enriching part. And I read somewhere, and I don't know where exactly, I can't remember, you try to write a page a day, and go over it, what you did the day before you know it, you have 300 pages in the course of a year. And so that's my process that I try to do.
Now, what's next? Are you going to stick with nonfiction?
Not sure quite yet. I may have always dreamed of writing a novel, which is why I took your course on novel writing. So I'm playing around with that for now. So
you've gotten started. You've gotten started with a novel.
A little bit, yeah.
How's that going so far? How would you compare the creative experience of being able to make it up with having to stick to the facts?
It's a lot more fun making it up, I can tell you that.
Are there frustrations that you're encountering as well?
I read like the authors I admire sometimes, and the scope of their imagination and knowledge is daunting, really. Nonfiction, at least you kind of know where the beginning, middle, and end are, and to just create things from your imagination is a bit daunting for me. So I'm having fun trying, and we'll see where it goes.
And what role has the Writers Center been playing in your creative process and your acquisition of knowledge and experience as a writer?
It was when I decided to keep on going after tough cases. I thought it might be helpful for, among other things, discipline. You know, I was working full time. You know, it's hard to find that kind of time, and so I took the first course, and I think it helped a lot with discipline. It helped a lot talking with other aspiring writers and go over their work, and they go over mine. It was a very collegial atmosphere, which was very helpful. I thought the Writer Center, I haven't taken that many courses, but every course I have taken, there's been serious people trying to do serious writing, and I'm very grateful for the Writer Center.
There's a question on the chat, and I am going to assume it's not a crank question. The question is, anything in the book about deaf dogs? Do you know what that's about?
You don't know what that's about? Where have you
No.
been, John?
Well,
I guess you really kind of out of things. There's a rock and roll band called Deaf Dog and the Indictments that I'm a member of, and we play old rock and roll. And,
look, I hear the Beatles broke up, so.
Well, we haven't broken up, but we haven't been able to rehearse. Although, with some.
What do you play? What do you play?
I play rhythm guitar.
Okay, I play drums. So if you need a drummer, just let me know.
Don't mention that to our drummer; he'll be very jealous.
Oh, okay. So what kind of music is it? Just straight ahead rock and roll?
It's all cover stuff: Motown, blues, rock and roll. We're a dance band, so we try to get people dancing. So we shamelessly pick popular songs that we think that we love, and we think other people, My Girl, and
nice.
all the standards.
Well, so who else is in the group? Who else is in the group, and what do they play?
Well, we have
and what do they do in real life?
Well, we have 7 judges and a psychologist, so we're all judges, and we didn't know a drummer at that time, so we picked a psychologist who was a friend of mine. We'd been in a garage band many years ago, and so he's been our drummer, and he's a lot of these guys are really terrific musicians. So, and I'm not being falsely immodest by saying I'm not one of them. We got 3 or 4 of these guys who could really have had a different career, but sadly went into the law instead.
That's incredible. There's another question. This is probably a little more serious. If you could sit down and talk with Sister Joseph about this book, what would you want to share with her?
Well, if you read the book, there's the first chapter, Welcome to Smithfield. She was just an extraordinary person. She'd been a nurse, the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth in Lexington, Kentucky. She came herself from a bit of a privileged background, but she felt a calling for religion. And I think she was living a fairly comfortable life in schools and in the convent. And she saw Edward R. Murrow documentary on the abuse of migrant farm workers, and she doesn't seem that old to me right now, but she was like 60, 62, 64, I think, and she gave up this very comfortable life to go into the fields, really, and nurse and take care of migrant farm workers who were very much abused. And so she was just a great inspiration, and she was sweet and compassionate, but she was also tough as nails. And she orchestrated a meeting with the governor of the state of North Carolina. We went up to Raleigh, and she let him have it, because she was so shocked at the conditions these mostly men were living in. And so she was a great inspiration to me.
Now, Susan Smith, one of your former interns, asked me to ask a couple of questions, and they revolve around the issue of, where did this drive come from, to work with the impoverished? And, because obviously Sister Joseph had a pivotal impact on you, but there was already something stirred up in you about justice. And where did that come from? How far back does that go?
I think I was a child of the 60s in many ways, and probably the three things that influenced me the most was the Holocaust, the Civil Rights Movement, and the Vietnam War. And it was a time of great upheaval and striving for justice. And there were many people who inspired me along the way. So those were probably the three things that affected me the most.
And how did you maintain, how were you willing, Susan wants to know, how were you able to, in a sense, stay with it? Because some of the, some of the cases were so sad and bleak. What was it that kept you going during those kinds of cases that you had to deal with?
I'm not sure I can fully answer that, but I will say camaraderie really helps. As a lawyer and as a judge, you have a family of people that you worked with. I graduated law school and I went into private practice, having more bravado than brains at the time, and having partners. I see my original partner here, Elkanah Burns, is on here, and it was. I think the camaraderie of working together for a joint cause really was very supportive. And even the death penalty work at Southern Center for Human Rights, we had these fabulous, dedicated people: Steve Bright, Bob Warren, who became our chief judge, George Kendall, Bryan Stevenson. I mean, we just had this wonderful band of people that were sharing a joint cause, and I felt we were working together.
Did you see the Chicago 7 movie?
I did.
And Judge Hoffman, you must have some observations about Judge Julius Hoffman, who was such a colorful person and infuriating to watch in this movie. What's your take on the Chicago 7 movie from the viewpoint of being a judge?
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because in the story about the individual who refused to eat, and we ended up trying him from the hospital by Zoom, I actually talk about the Chicago 7 trial in that chapter, in the sense that I note that we no longer chain recalcitrant defendants to their chairs and bound and gag them. And I think I said that the judge lost it in that case doing that. I mean, it was really pretty much an outrage. And one of the lawyers I mentioned in the chapter said, we've gone from a court of law to a medieval torture chamber. So some judges probably not fit to be judges to begin with, and especially in a high profile case like that, where he was certainly challenged in any number of different ways. I don't think more I can say about.
Well, do you think that things may have been different in the Chicago 7 case, and maybe even in the courtrooms that you're in, if cameras had been allowed in?
No, although.
Why not?
Well, if you go on YouTube and put in judges behaving badly, you'll see all sorts of judges doing outrageous things, knowing that they are on camera. I'm unlike, I think a lot of my colleagues are probably against having cameras in the courtroom. We don't have them in Superior Court. I'm actually in favor of them. I think, one, it might help some people temper down their worst impulses, but I also think it's good for the public to see what judges do. And if judges behave badly, they should be held accountable for it. So there are ways you can protect witnesses and jurors and victims of crime from having their faces on. So you can protect them. And many states do have it. And I think me personally, I think it's a good thing.
We only have time for one question and one more question. And I want it to be in terms of, if you wouldn't mind speaking to either lawyers to be or the legal community and the writing community, what advice do you have for people who are interested in, becoming writers and honing their craft? What advice do you have for people who are interested in pursuing justice and pursuing the law?
I'd love to give a full answer to that, but we only have 2 minutes, John. So I think
go for it. Go for it.
I'm not really sure I can. I mean, what I talk to my law clerks about always is you have to keep your integrity and your honesty, because in the world of the courts, it's it's adversarial. You want to win. And there are some lawyers who lose their guidance and go overboard and do unethical and even illegal things. And once you lose this is something I was taught as a lawyer from Judge Shuker and many others and on the court. Once you lose your integrity and your honesty, you're really nothing. No one's going to believe you or trust you ever again. As for writing, I think I'm still too much of a rookie here to give too much advice, other than the concept of staying with it really helps. And if it's 1 page a day, there's some progress. Sometimes it doesn't look very pretty, but there's something very special about doing writing, and I'm really enjoying doing it.
Were there ever any times where you thought about giving up as a writer?
I'm still too new at it, so I'm not sure I can answer that question.
Okay.
Give me
fair
some
enough.
time, John.
Okay, fair enough. This has been great. I'm John DeDakis, and we've been talking with Judge Russell Canan. And Russ, why don't you hold the book up again? Because the name of the book is Pursuing the Horizon, Stories of Justice. And there you have it, Canan. So thank you. This has been fun, and we had a lot of good questions. And Zach, I'll turn it over to you for any opportunity, any last minute announcements you want to make. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Thank you. This was fun.